a geek. Talking baseball every week. 'Cause they're Gleeman and a geek.
And welcome to Gleeman and the Geek, presented by Black Stack Brewing, now in a liquor store near you. I'm John Welch of the Twins Daily. With me, Aaron Gleeman of the FM. We have a lot to talk about today. There's a lot of news and notes, moving parts, I guess I would say. Some injury updates, some role changes. We have a White Sox series to talk about.
Sure.
That was, I guess, successful for the Twins? Question mark. Sort of. It's hard. Like, I don't know that there is a successful series against the White Sox that isn't a sweep. And so they didn't hit that. And certainly the last game was just an annoying rain-soaked.
Well, and there was a lot of annoying parts even in the games that they won. Like those first 5 innings of Wednesday's game.
They were not impressive.
Stranded 12 of 15 bases.
Yeah, it's almost gotten like a comical level of inability to cash in, whether it's bases loaded or like 2 runners on, something like that. And
baseball gods are not kind right now.
It's certainly, if it wouldn't have been the White Sox, they would have lost some of these games.
Well, that's what I was wondering. Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit on Wednesday's mailbag. So on the Patreon, we had recorded Wednesday after Tuesday's game. So we talked quite a bit about Tuesday's game and some of the things that came out of that.
Yeah.
On that one, that's probably when we broke that down. But since we've talked to you guys on this free one,
we've done 2. Here's the thing: we do this free show every Friday, pretty much. Right. Not quite every Friday, but most Fridays. And then in between, before we do another free one a week later, we do usually 2 Patreon shows.
So we already talked entirely about the Atlanta sweep.
Yeah,
we swept by Atlanta.
We talked about Keaschall. We talked about. So we're going to get into all this stuff, obviously. But if you're saying a week is a long time to pass, and there's a lot of things happening that
if you miss us.
Well, I wasn't going to put it like that, but sure. That's your confidence level, not my confidence level. I'm saying if there was Twin stuff that happened between Fridays that you wanted to hear discussed, patreon.com/Gleeman, you'll get it. But so they win the first 2 against the White Sox. Then yesterday, third game.
Lose a rain-shortened game.
Just a low effort, nothing going.
Yeah.
Couldn't hit, leaving runners on.
The game reflected the weather.
Yeah.
Which was just one long farmer's rain.
Yeah. And I sat through an hour-plus rain delay, and the field was like mud, basically. I mean, clearly the Twins were motivated to keep playing.
Right, yeah.
Any losing team is motivated to play the last 2 or 3 innings of the game, but even more so, they know the White Sox bullpen is very capable of blowing a 3-run lead.
Right.
But the messaging from like Baldelli afterward, we don't get to talk to the umpires unless we request them, but clearly they were like, it's just not a playable field.
Yes.
It was just mud. And
I mean, basically every break between innings from the 5th inning on, you'd have the umpire out there pointing to, you got to do this, you got to do this, you got to do this.
I found out the surface. I used to think it was called diamond dust that they put it on it.
Is that what it's called?
It's called turfus. Like surface, turfus,
okay.
Which they were using. And I heard from someone that in a typical kind of rain situation, not like a monsoon, but just like a normal rain where they delay or they play through it, they use about 20 bags of that stuff.
They were using 20 bags every half inning.
I heard they used 80-something bags.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
And so what happens is if the rain never really slows down, it just kind of... You're building mud, basically.
Right. Yeah,
like you're just kind of pouring that on top of the
sludge.
Yeah, it really was. And so by the time an hour passed, it didn't get any worse, and it was just sort of a steady amount of rain.
Right.
And so they banged it in baseball terms. And unfortunately, on the other hand, the Twins had 0 runs at that point. So even against the White Sox, scoring 3 runs in a couple innings was hardly guaranteed at that point. But yeah, a disappointing way to finish a series. We had kind of talked because now they get the Angels, which is another poor team. They're not nearly as bad as the White Sox. Nobody is as bad as the White Sox, including the Twins are not as bad as the White Sox. But it's similar to last year's schedule in a weird way because last year they start 7-13 and then they win 12 in a row. Right. But they largely did that against the White Sox and the Angels. And so now this year they were 7-15, and then they get 6 home games against the White Sox, which we've now seen. Those 3, and then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And, 2 of 3 against the Twins. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, which is starting tonight for this weekend. And then the Angels, whi one of the things we talked about probably last year too, but I know we talked about after the Atlanta series on the Patreon side heading into this homestand was, first of all, you just have to, I think, go 4-2 minimally in this 6 games against 2 bad teams at home.
Agreed.
Not because that's showing something, but because you have to start climbing out of this hole that you've dug. And, going 3-3 against 2 bad teams at home is actually sinking further just in terms of you've eliminated 6 games against bad opponents and all that. But even beyond just what's their record, and you have to have a winning record during this, and so far they're 2-1. If they go 2-1 against the Angels, you've checked that box. But we talked a lot about how equally important in my mind was, how do they look?
Yeah.
And they did not look good in this White Sox series. No. And, wins are wins, but I guess what I meant was at the end of this 6-game homestand, let's say they go 4-2, they go 2-1, they win 2 out of 3 against both opponents. That's fine. That's not like a spectacular outcome, but that's fine. But at the end of it, is the feeling you got from watching those 6 games, well, these teams are just bad, and the Twins just sort of were less bad? Or is the feeling you got, okay, they're actually starting to put things together, that, the pitching is clicking a little bit with the hitting, the defense is sharper, and we just haven't seen that through the 3 games of the White Sox, setting aside the record. And, they got a great boost from Luke Keaschall, and there were some good moments, certainly. Larnach had a couple of big home runs. Yep. And, there are individual things you can point to, but overall, the sloppiness and the sort of low energy and the offensive ineptitude and some of the other things.
Honestly, I think a lot of the things have looked a little bit better. Like, I think the fielding and such has been better over this series.
Right. But they haven't looked so much better that when you count the opponent quality, it's encouraging.
There's still been some shaky moments from the bullpen, which is definitely part of the factor that's going on. And the offenses, I guess you're right that there have been moments where I'm like, okay, like Keaschall has absolutely been a boost.
Yes.
They're leaning into their speed that they have at certain positions has absolutely been a plus.
Which is mostly Keaschall and Buxton, but that's plenty.
Right.
That's a lot for their standard.
You can take a look at, we're about to talk about, I presume, help is on the way, we think, right, to help with some of that stuff. But, it's not they did not look significantly better than the White Sox.
Right. It's like you're a heavyweight and you lose some fights, and then you go to middleweight. Right. You're expected to just knock the crap out of them, and they didn't really. They won on decisions, I felt like, against middleweights. Let's see. We got a lot to talk about, so let's just run through as much of this as we can. You talked about the inability to cash in runners, which is funny because early on, through 2 or 3 weeks of the season, they were really, they were hitting 180 as a team. Now they're hitting 210 or whatever. But their runners and scoring position numbers were actually good because they had a couple of big innings, like a couple of 5-run innings or 6-run innings where they bunched hits and they actually won a few games where the overall, you end up with 6 hits for the game, but they all happen in the 4th inning or whatever. Right. But now that is very much not happened. Like the Atlanta series, they were horrible with runners in scoring position. Now, since then, not only have they been bad with runners in scoring position, but it's like bases loaded, 1 out, they don't get a hit twice in a row, all that sort of thing. And so now you look at their runners in scoring position numbers and they're not even good. Now it's just a bad offense that's bad, as opposed to a bad offense that has broken through a few times, which can get you, a couple wins, even though when you're not hitting. So that is definitely, that's been an issue. I don't even want to say since when, since eternity, since the dinosaurs walked the earth. If you believe in that sort of thing, I don't want to anger people who don't believe in this. And so the other thing we talked about heading into this series Monday, because Monday was an off day, we did a Patreon show on the off day, was I felt, and I think you kind of agreed, that for the first time I actually got a genuine feeling that Baldelli's job could be in imminent jeopardy. And I don't mean he's going to get fired the next day, but if they had, lost 2 out of 3 against the White Sox and then lost 2 out of 3 against the Angels, let's say, and then you're going back on the road, you're at that point, you're past the 30-something game mark of the season, and that's still early, but it's not super early. This was the first time, and I'm not saying people haven't been talking about Baldelli's job being in jeopardy. That was happening last August and September and all offseason, but for the first time I felt like if they don't get their crap together here and at least beat up on a couple of bad teams and at least, start to climb back to 500 instead of treading water or falling further, I started to think, well, Baldelli's job could be in jeopardy. And I'm not, certainly winning 2 out of 3 in a sloppy fashion against the White Sox is not going to really impact that. But that's become a storyline here, undeniably, just in terms of how much longer can you do this before change for change sake. And we're not going to get heavy into that because we spent, the first half hour of the last show on Patreon going through all the scenarios and who might replace them and, the pros and cons of doing a move in season and what the mentality is, all that stuff. But yeah, this did feel like a weirdly big homestand given how early and how weak the opposition is. Yeah. And sitting there through the first 3 White Sox games, it didn't feel big. It didn't feel like we're going to put our best foot forward here and clobber this opponent. And I just wonder, are they capable of that at this stage? You know what I mean?
When Baldelli talks about this team, he talks about trying to work hard and fight your way through this stuff. Right. And that's what it feels like they're doing.
It's grinding your way through.
It feels like this team is trying to grind its way to being respectable.
Yeah.
And, and it's been an uphill climb.
Yeah, my God. Let's talk a little bit about Keaschall because that's been a bright spot. And he got another good game yesterday. Yeah, it was unfortunate. The rain sucked overall. Obviously, it made for a miserable viewing experience.
Yes.
It delayed the game and then canceled the game or suspended the game, ended the game, whatever, banged it. But beyond that, Keaschall was on base, but there was no opportunity to run because your feet were getting stuck in the mud.
But he did.
But I mean, he reached. There was a spot where he reached and he was on first, and I'm just I'm looking at first base, and he's trying to get mud off his foot, and I'm well, we didn't get that 6 stolen base in 6 games, which would have kept him tied. He tied the record. This is kind of amusing, actually. Through 5 games, he had 5 steals in his first 5 games, which is the most in the history of baseball. It was like a 4-way tie. Vince Coleman and a couple other guys. He had a 500. He's got a 5-something on base percentage, which means he's gotten on base in more than half of his plate appearances. He's ripped a few doubles. He's drawn a bunch of walks. He got hit by a pitch yesterday or 2 games ago. Yeah, just been phenomenal. But the running is something we just haven't seen, other than maybe Buxton in the last 10 years for anybody with the Twins. And so he steals.
By the way, we also didn't see it in spring training. From Keaschall.
Oh,
I mean, we were told part of what he brings to he runs.
They don't run in spring.
Right, they don't run in spring training. Right. I
mean, so he steals 2 bases, 1 game, 2 bases the next game. Total of 5 in his first 5 games, which, like I said, ties the all-time MLB record. So we're talking to him after the second game of the White Sox series when he stole 2 bases. He's quiet. He's not. He behaves like a rookie when you're interviewing him. He didn't take a lot of credit. He was kind of saying, and I said, actually, someone goes, ask him about the record that I had tweeted out. Yeah. So I'm like, my experience with that in the past with let's say Buxton, who sets all kinds of weird records, like first guy to homer this time, they never care. The players are not into it. Nerds like me, and
or at least they're not going to react that way like they care.
They're not on Play Index looking up stuff. But anyway, someone from the Twins nudges me and goes, ask them about the record. So I say, I don't know if you know this, but you tied the record, all-time Major League record, 5 steals in your first 5 games. That's the most ever. And he goes, cool. And I go, so, I was trying to get him. And he goes, hey, you learn something new every day. And I thought, that's embarrassing for the dork who asked him this question. It's me. And I was like, that'll never happen again. He's hitting 368, which, there's. Right. But what's funny is we've certainly seen.
On base has got to be what, 500?
520.
Yeah, right.
And 526 slugging, which he's got the 3 doubles. No homers yet, but 3 doubles. We've seen, and every team experiences this. I mean, if you call up 20 rookies, 3 of them are going to hit 350 for the first 5 games. That's just how distribution of randomness works, But we've seen that. I mean, hell, Brooks Lee had a great first week, and so it doesn't guarantee anything. But we've seen guys do that. I think Astudillo did that. I remember Glenn Williams back in the day. If younger Twins fans, go look up Glenn Williams' first 3 weeks in the majors. Then he separated his shoulder and he was never seen again. But there's an anybody who hits, it's like we said when the Twins, when you lose 8 out of 10, and people go, they look like they don't care. Well, you're never going to look like you care when you lose 8 out of 10.
Right.
There's not an unimpressive way for a rookie to hit 350 in their first week in the majors. You know what I mean? It's always going to be like, oh, what a jump start they've provided. They look great. Oh, I'm so excited about them. But there are levels to the impressiveness. You know what I mean? Yes. And Keaschall's is about as impressive of a hot week, like as I've ever seen, because he's hitting in big spots. He's delivering some power. But the strike zone control and the plate discipline and the grind it out of the at-bats, which was the scouting report on him, is extremely impressive. Yeah, he's just a hard guy to pitch to.
The stuff he is showing looks like a skill that is going to take you past the occasional hot streak.
Right. And, he's not going to hit 350. The batting average on balls in play is going to fall. And there's a luck component to it. It's not trying to take away from what he's done. But there are some guys who just come up and they hit 350 for their first 5 or 6 games, and they got no walks, and they got 6 strikeouts, and it's just everything they hit found a hole, or they had some good at bats. But he's got some of that, obviously. His first hit was blooped over first base. That's not a sustainable.
But he's also impacted games by taking a walk and then stealing a base.
He's kind of imposed his will on games, which for a 22-year-old who's got all of 3 weeks at AAA under his belt, and by the way, in all this, isn't even fully recovered from the elbow surgery he had in August, to the point that he's primarily a DH. And so I just am blown away. And it's also, I think, from like a narrative confirmation standpoint, this isn't a guy who's come out of nowhere. I mean, this was a top 100 prospect, their minor league player of the year last year. He was one of the breakout across MLB hitting prospects last year who really kind of established himself as a guy on the rise. Starts this year at AAA at 22, plays 14 or 15 games there, and now he's up. And we talked about, he's up much ahead of schedule, despite not even being fully, cleared. He can't even play the outfield yet because he can't throw long distances yet. Right. And he's only started twice at second base, and I know he made an error there.
Yes.
And he also, it's funny that game, he's only started twice at second, so it was the White Sox start that he got because he's otherwise been a DH. He made an error on a fairly, I don't want to say it was fully routine, but that's a play he should make.
Right.
But then he made a nice play.
Bad time, too. 2 outs and runners on bases loaded.
Then he made up for it. Yeah. But he also made a very nice play on a ball where he ranged up the middle towards center field, stopped it, and I thought in my head, this poor bastard who's got a surgically repaired elbow ligament, he's never going to get the ball to first base. Like I thought he might just eat it and not throw it. He threw it behind second base, which is a very long throw in any context for a second baseman, but especially because his momentum was heading towards the outfield. Right. And he didn't get much.
That is just all arm strength.
Yes.
It isn't. You can't get your feet into it at all. Your legs.
He doesn't have arm strength. Like he's building back up arm strength 8 months after a surgery that for pitchers, Tommy John surgery, costs you 12 to 15 months. Right. And he hopped the throw. But he got it there, and Ty France made a nice scoop on it and saved him from what would have been another misplay or miscue, I guess. And I know people are like, any first impression. I'm not telling people not to react to his defense yet, because if you're gonna allow people to enjoy the offense, you have to let people have an outsized reaction also to the defense. All I'm saying is, this dude's elbow was repaired. It's not fully healthy, and beyond that, he's barely played defense for like the last year and a half because he spent all of last season primarily playing DH and first base to limit his throwing. So he will be in time, I think, a pretty good second baseman, can play all 3 outfield spots, but it might be a while. It's going to be a while probably before you see him in the outfield at all. Well, even when you and it might be a while before you see what he actually looks like at second base.
Even when you saw him in spring training, fielding ground balls, which he was doing a lot of every day.
He wasn't even making throws.
He was just lobbing it underhand over to first base or to to a coach.
So don't overlook that aspect. This is a guy who's doing what he's doing with an arm that's like 50% of what hopefully it will be. But what he's doing is it's so impressive to me, and it's also just stylistically fun.
Right,
it's fun to watch a 22-year-old grind out these at bats, be hard to strike out. And it's not just weak contact. I mean, he's ripping some of these balls on these doubles to left field and stuff. And like you said, walks, singles, whatever. Once he gets on, he is ready to go. Yes. And he kind of talked about, because he's been a good base stealer in college and the minors.
Sure.
He's been like a 30 or 40 steal type of guy. But if you look at like his speed numbers, he's fast, but he's not like Buxton fast.
Right.
He's like good, solid, above average, 70th percentile type of speed. But he's a great example so far, and I'm sure, if he keeps running this wild, he's going to get thrown out.
It's also been versus the White Sox. We should say.
True. Well, Braves too.
Yeah, a little bit.
But he's, I think, an example of how so much of what we think of speed isn't necessarily base stealing or base running. And we've often talked about it like slow guys can be somebody. Joe Mauer, who's never been accused of being fast,
Right.
was a great base runner because he would go first to third at every opportunity. He would cut every corner perfectly. He would be aggressive when you wanted to be aggressive. And no one ever went, oh, man, Joe Mauer just outran that ball. No. Joe Mauer made smart, good cuts and, took advantage. He had high baseball IQ. Keaschall seems to be that in that he's getting excellent jumps. He's choosing good pitches. He's also just being super aggressive.
Yes.
And he's got the speed to at least like maximize it to some extent. Yeah. And so that's just so fun to watch. And I'm saying that as a guy who's not a big, we both know the math behind stolen bases.
Right.
I mean, we know the reason why stolen bases have declined across baseball for 40 years now. And it's not just because people didn't like watching it. People love watching it.
Right.
But I also think what we've seen from Keaschall now in a very brief stint, but also what we've seen from now a healthy Buxton, like he's healthier, his legs are healthy. We've seen what Baldelli has talked about for years.
Yes.
Which is,
this is Baldelli ball.
I would love to run.
Right.
They just don't give me anybody who's fast. Like, who am I going to have run in these past years?
I believe his quote in spring training was something to the effect of, I want to steal bases. Yeah. I just want them to be safe when they get there.
Correct. Which is,
right.
Yeah. And so we're seeing now they have Buxton, who's, I think, 5 for 5, and Keaschall, who's 5 for 5. I think the rest of the team has like 5 or 6 total. Bader hasn't done a whole lot of successful running. Yeah. Willi Castro's been hurt, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But you do see that, like, that was the type of player Baldelli was, by the way.
Right.
Faster than Keaschall, more aggressive than Keaschall, also like much more raw and toolsy than Keaschall as a hitter. But it doesn't, I always thought it was a flawed premise to look at like the Twins' very low stolen base totals and attribute that to like a decision by the manager when, like last year, for instance, they had literally the slowest average sprint speed as a team in all of baseball. Well, the manager would have to be nuts to be like, I'm going to run wild with that. But if you hand them the keys to a car that can actually go 0 to 60,
that's it.
You see now that he can actually do some things, and I think he's enjoying that. I mean, just Keaschall, I don't know. Let me see. There was one other thing on Keaschall I wanted to and we've also seen Brooks Lee have some good moments in this series too.
Yep, he's starting to warm up a little bit.
He's starting to look a little bit Luis Ariz-ish to me on some of these balls where
knocking it through the opposite field.
He just sort of tennis serves it out to left field.
Yeah, right.
And I think that is reputationally that's how people talked about him like in college. And then we really haven't seen that because I think he's trying to add some power and he's been injured, obviously. Yeah. But there were 2 hits during these past 3 games where he just flicked the ball into left field for a single. And it was like, that is how you hit 290 instead of 260 if you're Brooks Lee. Because he has the bat control to do it. I think it's more just approach based.
I also thought he had some well-placed grounders between shortstop and third base.
Yeah.
Some that squeaked through, some that maybe shortstop can get to, but he can't make the play on, something like that. I'm not sure how much that trends for the future, but it has been nice to see him show something.
And he's drawn some walks. He's looked good defensively. I thought that's not a surprise, but
right?
Just confirms.
No, I mean that has been his biggest impact. I feel like has been at third base has been his defensive.
Yes, especially compared to how much Miranda and Castro were struggling before that, I would say. Before we get to some more notes, let's talk about, first of all, our presenting sponsor.
Black Stack Brewing. I'm very excited now that they are at my local liquor store because that is I love going to their tap room. I love seeing all the different beers they have on their tap room. If you went to the Winter Meltdown with Aaron and I and such, you got to taste their local 755 New England IPA or their Slopes French Pilsner or their Pull Tabs Pale Ale. And, I mean, they were a big hit. And I'm getting, because we talk about them regularly, because they're presenting sponsor of Gleeman the Geek, I get messages on social media. They're like, hey, I just found my new beer of the summer, is the local 75 New England IPA. they have done beer. They've done beer, and you don't have to go to the tap room anymore to get it. You get to. They're known for their beer, and now it is available to you. So what I would ask you to do is stop by Black Stack Brewing near 94 and 280, or even easier, ask for them at your local liquor store. They are now available all over the state of Minnesota, from Grand Marais to Rochester, Winona to Fargo. Find your favorites. And they also have some seltzers if you're not a beer fan. But go to their Where to Buy page on their website. Check out where you can get your favorite beer or THC, or just, like I said, ask for them at your local liquor store.
Our next sponsor could come in handy for anyone trying to get Twins and/or Timberwolves and/or Wild, by the way, tickets right now.
Which is going to be a big weekend, kids.
Yeah, the Game Time app. It's an app, not a website. Here's all you do. You download the Game Time app. You search for whatever game you want to go to, and their specialties are twofold. One, hard to find tickets. Well, that's Wolves and Wild. And then last minute tickets. So we'll apply that to the Twins. Not necessarily hard to find, obviously. Yeah. But those are the two specialties for the Game Time app. And the beauty of it is you can get very good prices on good tickets, and the app itself can help you sort of filter the best value. In other words, can kind of tell you, at this price point, this seat is or isn't a good deal.
Yep.
So don't just buy it sight unseen. Like, you want to actually sit in a good seat at that price, and that's a feature that Game Time has.
And you can do it, by the way, while you're on your way to the game.
Yes, literally. On your phone, and then just flash the phone, walk right in. I've seen John do that. Get off a stool at a bar, and on the 6-minute walk to Target Field, boom.
We damn near did it for the Wild game last night.
Yeah. You can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you have to do is download the Game Time app and create an account. And then once you do that, use the code Gleeman, and you get $20 off your first purchase. Right. Terms apply, but just create an account on the Game Time app and redeem the code GLEEMAN for $20 off your first purchase. Okay. Let's get to some of this other stuff. You mentioned more help can be on the way. So tonight, we're recording this Friday morning. Tonight, the plan is for Royce Lewis to begin a rehab assignment with St. Paul, AAA St. Paul. We've seen him the past couple of days pregame, running the bases, going through drills that are, testing.
Bobby Nightingale's TikTok had a video of.
Oh, God, there's a sentence. It was like kind of the last test of this hamstring strain that he had in mid-March. So it's been 5 weeks, and there's always a lot of talk with timelines and stuff with Twins and injuries, and we're always monitoring that stuff. I will note that the Twins never did give a timeline on Royce Lewis.
Right.
They still have not given a timeline,
right. But
it's roughly 5.5 going on 6 weeks for an injury that we said at the time, just based on similar injuries to other players, including Jorge Polanco a couple years ago with the Twins, kind of revolves around 6 weeks. 6 to 8 seemed like kind of a safe timeline, given Lewis's lengthy injury history and the fact that they weren't really going to rush him back, obviously. Well, we're coming up on 6 weeks. He's starting to rehab. Seems pretty likely that he's going to, he's right at that. So that's good to see. Because there's always a lot of skepticism at the time of an injury, like, he's going to miss 6 months or whatever.
It sounds like it's not going to be a super quick turnaround.
Yes, this is what I was going to say. Yeah. So talking to a few people, including Royce, he's always, I'm ready to play now. Like,
yes, I know.
What great, right. Royce. Sure. Me too. Yeah. Put me in, coach. But it sounds like they're going to treat him at AAA how they treat, Buxton when he goes on a rehab, Kepler when he would go on a rehab, which is, you start out maybe a DH day for 7 innings. Maybe you take the next day off, or if you don't take the next day off, maybe you play third base for 6 innings. Then maybe you take a day off or something like that. Then you start to go, okay, now we'll do a DH for a full game. Okay. Right. Then you go, let's play third base for a full game. The real test, until you see Royce Lewis play back-to-back games at third base, that's the point where if he gets through that and he feels good, then he's probably just about ready to rejoin the Twins. But until he does that, don't look at the box score on day one and go, he
went 3 for 4 at the DH.
He hit a homer on the first pitch he saw. That's not the box they're looking to check. They're looking to check legs, running, moving, how you feel the next day. And so I think the key, and I said similar about Brock Stewart when he was coming back, until you see him pitch back-to-back games, don't assume he's ready. And in fact, he pitched back-to-back days for Fort Myers, and he joined the Twins.
He didn't even do it in St. Paul, right?
30 hours later or whatever. And so that's kind of how I'm viewing the Royce Lewis situation. And, setbacks are a worry, obviously, but more than that, they don't want to be in a situation where he returns at 80% and is unable to run or is just at more risk than even before to re-injure this thing or have another muscle injury or something. And so the good news is ready to start a rehab, but everybody cool down a little bit on, I don't think you're certainly not going to see him this weekend against the Angels.
Sure.
And I think they head to Cleveland for 4 games Monday. I would be surprised if he plays in that series.
Yeah, that's the way it sounds.
I wouldn't be shocked if he plays in the following series, which is at Fenway against the Red Sox.
So that would be returning a week from today.
Yes. Yeah. That seems reasonable to me because you also have to factor in St. Paul never plays on Mondays.
Yeah.
So if he plays Friday and either takes Saturday off and plays Sunday or plays Friday, Sunday, or Saturday and takes Sunday off to get the 2 days off, like he's only going to have 2 games played by the time Tuesday rolls around, basically, is my guess. So I would put the over-under on games played at AAA at, 4.5, 5.5, something like that. And it depends on how he looks and it depends on how he performs and all that. But it's good news in general, but I think there's still a couple of hurdles to clear just because of the nature of the injury and his obviously lengthy injury history and setbacks and all that stuff. But
I was really, when we talked about this on Wednesday on the Patreon, we also talked about this on Wednesday because by then that was the first time he ran the bases.
Right.
I was kind of hoping they would be rushing him back and we would see him Monday in Cleveland.
It seems like that was never really
right.
And I think that's specific to him because as we've talked about, in my mind,
they are rushing people right now.
And I think there's like a negative connotation with rushing, and I'm not necessarily saying that, but Brock Stewart made 2 rehab appearances at Fort Myers, never even pitched for the Saints, rejoined the bullpen. Brooks Lee played 3 games for the Saints and replaced Miranda. Keaschall, who played 2 weeks for the Saints, wasn't even that amazing for the Saints, is clearly limited defensively and is still rehabbing.
I think the first time he played full 9 innings at a position was with the Twins. Like, I don't think he even did that.
I think he did it once. It might have been like literally the day before they called him up. But yeah, and he's not 100%, but they wanted him in the majors. And so far they're right of the impact he's capable of making with the bat and the legs, even if he can't use his arm, basically. Yes. But I think it's just a different circumstance with Royce. Right. To sit here and pretend like he's a normal injury situation or just a normal player, I think would be disingenuous. And so they're aware of that. He's aware of that deep down, even if he never acts as if he's. He is aware of that. So we'll see. But generally good news with him. He's on schedule. By all accounts, I saw him run twice so far, like with my own eyes pregame. He's moving pretty well. It didn't seem like he was in any obvious discomfort or dragging the leg around or anything. And they had him doing sprints and running to first, running through the bag, doing left turns and all that. So pretty good. We can talk more about this upcoming week on the
we should just mention he heard it running to first base.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is spring training, right?
Yeah. Most of his injuries have been running.
Right.
He last year
second base.
Rounding second base. That's the thing, like defensively, and we just talked about how good Brooks Lee's looked at third base. Well, they decided after kind of tinkering with potentially having Royce Lewis play some second base at the end of last season and then this offseason, they basically decided, no, he's the third baseman now, which would imply that when they're both in the lineup, Brooks Lee's going to be the second baseman.
Right.
And I'm fine with that. I think Brooks Lee is very capable of being a good second baseman too.
Of course.
But we can be pretty sure already he's a good third baseman. Right. I think probably better than Lewis. But the thing about that is Lewis hasn't gotten hurt playing defense. Right. You want to knock on wood there.
Right, yeah. But it doesn't help for him to be DH or first base or whatever.
From a wear and tear and workload standpoint, maybe that's, you're still on your legs, you're still diving and stuff. That doesn't mean he can't get hurt. But I wonder what the alignment would be or will be, hopefully like a week from now, let's say, when he returns. Now, it's possible if Brooks Lee doesn't play well over the next week that Brooks Lee could be sent down to make room, because otherwise, it's Julian versus Lee, I would say, not from a roster standpoint, because they can always just send down Mickey Gasper again or something. But I get the sense with both of those guys, and certainly with Lee, you don't want them collecting dust. You don't want them sitting on a major league bench, whereas Mickey Gasper or Kersey or whoever, you don't care about that. And so I feel like it could be Lee versus Julian to see like who goes to create an everyday role for Lewis, because whoever's bumped by Lewis, you want them to continue getting at bats, and that's going to happen much easier at AAA. Now, it's also possible that Luke Keaschall turns into a pumpkin at midnight and, some of the flaws are exposed, or he just has a rough week or whatever, and they say, okay, thanks for the boost. Go back to AAA until we need you again full time. So that's something to watch. But I also think, Lewis, even if he is healthy, I wouldn't be playing him at third base every day. I'd be wanting to get him a lot of work at DH, which runs into Keaschall maybe, because Keaschall needs time at DH now at this point.
Keaschall could be taking second base on those days.
Yes, but I just mean you can't play Lewis 5 days a week at DH because Keaschall has to play 3 or 4 days a week at DH probably. So that's something to watch, I think. But again, that's probably a week up. That's a nice problem to have, obviously, at that point. The one other thing. Okay, well, I guess let's talk about Castro, too, as long as we're talking about injury updates. So the Castro situation, it's one of the few times that this regime has reminded me of the old regime. And I mean that, I guess, in a derogatory way, sort of. Where, we used to mock the old regime, and this is when it was the disabled list back then, but the injured list was 15 days for everyone. Where now for position players, it's only 10 days. And that actually makes what they did worse in my mind. But it used to be 15 days, and they would have guys, I always use Nick Punto as an example, but there's a lot of examples of it, where a guy would get hurt, we're talking 10, 15 years ago, whatever, when Gardenhire was the manager and Terry Ryan was running things. And a guy would get hurt, and they'd play with what was a 24-man roster back then. For a week, sometimes 10 days. Yeah. And when asked about it, they'd be like, well, we think he can return before the 15 days are up. So we're going to play with down a man for 8, 9, 10, 11 days just so we can have Nick Punto back 3 days earlier than he would have been anyway. Meanwhile, we just played shorthanded where we could have just replaced him. With a 10-day IL, that's an even more egregious sin, I guess, if you do that. And that's exactly what happened with Willi Castro. Now, I will preface everything I'm about to say and we're about to say with this. I don't think they really cared that much that they were playing shorthanded for however long they ended up playing shorthanded. Because the alternative, if they had just placed Castro on the IL immediately, which in retrospect they should have, we'll talk about that in a second, was to recall Mickey Gasper or to call up some guy who wasn't going to play anyway.
It didn't really matter.
And so they've kind of hinted that at. In fact, I think Baldelli said, I don't know that there were that many matchups that we missed out on, which is his way of saying I wouldn't have used the guy anyway. But that's not that great of a sign either. That's just a different issue. That just means you didn't have quality depth in place, in part because of injuries, but in part because of
different. It's also a problem. It's just a different problem.
Where it's like it's April, and you're telling me it wasn't even worth putting a guy on the IL in a timely manner because you didn't have anybody you wanted to use him in his place. That's like, well, that's not a great sign. But getting back to the Castro thing specifically, so here's what ended up happening with him. He strained his oblique. It was a minor strain. I mean, a moderate oblique can be 6-8 weeks. This was a minor strain.
This was last Wednesday.
Yes. Came out of the game, all that. The problem for him was he's a switch hitter. He was fine fielding. He was fine running. He was fine hitting right-handed against left-handed pitchers. But his left-handed swing, which is your primary swing, you're going to use that 2/3, 3/4 of the time.
And it's his strong side.
That's the thing. He's not good from the right side. He's good from the left side.
He's a switch hitter, but he's not particularly.
That was what was, it was pulling at him. That's what was giving him problems. And it just didn't progress in the way they had hoped, obviously. So what ended up happening with him is he was on the active roster but unavailable to appear in a game for 8 full days. Now, 2 of those were off days. So on either side of the Atlanta series. So it was only 6 games, only quote-unquote 6 games. So they played with 12 position players instead of 13 position players, essentially, for 8 days, 6 games. Now, they were clearly hoping that 3 or 4 days in, maybe 5 days in, he would be able to return in some capacity.
They took a calculated risk.
Yes, that's what Baldelli.
I liked that, actually.
Yeah, to me, a risk has to have a reward. And it was unclear to me what the big reward is on this. And I'm not I mean, Willi Castro.
To be fair, there wasn't a big reward on either side.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening was he's unavailable for 8 days while taking up a roster spot. What was also weird was the whole time, like you said, Baldelli was talking and other people were talking about, we think he's getting close. Like he can't get over the hump. Meanwhile, Castro's quotes to us, and in particular, I saw Bobby pull him aside in the hallway a couple days ago and got a quote from him. Castro was not giving any impression that he was close.
Right. Yeah.
And
right.
so, like, within minutes, you'd hear from a Twins person, Baldelli or whoever, and it was like, yeah, it's been 4 days. We're hoping maybe tomorrow or the next day. And then somebody would talk to Castro, and Castro would be like, yeah, I'm not ready. Like, it's still bothering me. And it's like, where's the disconnect here?
Yeah.
And so then what ended up happening was they finally place him on the IL after 8 days unavailable. You can only backdate now injured list stints by 3 days, which means he misses 8. Now the clock starts on 10, which is 7 because you can backdate it, which means he's going to end up missing a minimum of 15 days instead of 10 days.
Right.
And so here's the two scenarios for that. And neither of them are good, but here's the two scenarios with that. One is he'll be ready to go before the 15 days are up, in which case they
costed themselves, right?
Right. Now you're without him for 5 extra days, basically, when he's ready to go. Or, which is just from a roster standpoint, the exact opposite of what they were trying to do.
Right.
Or he won't be ready. He still won't be ready when the 15 days are up, in which case your entire diagnosis of him was completely wrong.
From way off.
Like, off base that he ended up missing 3 weeks or something when you thought he could miss 3 days. Neither of those paint a great picture of what's going on from communication or medical or whatever. And I get oblique injuries can be real weird.
It's true.
It's not a torn this that you can diagnose or a broken bone that you can diagnose. And it's really just a matter of pain tolerance and if it's just still catching on your left-handed swing. So I'm not saying I could have done any better, obviously. I didn't even go to upstairs medical school. But, man, a weird situation. And
it's been weird. You're right in that this used to be seemingly a constant topic in like 2016, 2015, 2014, like on this podcast.
Yes.
So we've got some experience talking about this in the past. It's been a while.
It's a raw nerve for us. Where you're like, why is he so upset about
probably a little overly sensitive to it because of nothing this regime has done.
Right.
It's because of the previous regime. Right.
Somebody who just heard that might have gone, boy, the first time they've done that, he's that upset? No, it's like the 85th time the Twins have done that. It's just, Well, and part of the reason they went to 10 days.
This is vintage Twins right here.
Yeah, it brings back bad memories. But part of the reason MLB switched to 10-day ILs for position players as opposed to 15-day ILs for position players was to try to discourage teams from doing this.
Right.
To try to motivate teams to say, hey, if you think this guy's going to miss like 3 or 4 days for sure, just put him on the 10-day. He can be back in a week and a half.
Right.
Whereas 15 days, that's 2.5 weeks, basically. Like, it's a 50% more. Like, it changed the decision maker, or it was intended to do that. And so to still get in this situation, now, again, I really think ultimately this was partly about Willi Castro, but it was mostly about the fact that they went, well, who cares? Who are we going to use? Because they can't add another pitcher.
Right.
They would love, we talked about this on the last show.
That's right.
They would love to add a 14th, 15th, 18th pitcher, but
it's
you can't.
It's a 26-man roster, but you're limited to only 13 pitchers.
Right.
And
it also hurt them because he's their mop-up pitcher. Willi Castro.
I suppose.
So they were down to half a pitcher, too.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and I mean, the other, we'll probably get to this in a little later on, but Baldelli is also at the point where he's clearly feeling some urgency to start winning games. We talked about the grinding that's going on.
Yeah.
You know, he is sticking with his hits at this point. Like he is Brooks Lee is going to start every game.
Right.
There's
less mixing and matching, although I think that's the same issue, which is their bench is so weak.
You're right.
And they have so few, like the utility that a guy like Gasper or Kersey bring in their eyes is not the same as last year where they had every game. If a righty started, they had a couple righty bats off the bench. If a lefty started, they had some lefty. Like they could mix and match, and that drove some people bananas, obviously. They just don't have that anymore. There isn't that many levers to pull in game.
Well, they're also not facing any lefties.
True, but what is the bench most days? The bench is Vasquez, Gasper, Kersey, who's a pinch runner, and then like one guy who can do something usually, but I mean, it's been Castro, which is he's unavailable.
Right. That's right.
And that all just goes back to depth.
Or
and
Bride or Birdie now.
Right.
Well, how do you say his last name? Do you know?
Bride.
Is it Bride? It is Bride?
I think.
Okay.
I've only seen him bat once so far. I haven't talked to him.
Okay.
I couldn't pick him out of a lineup, baseball or police.
I think he only started one game. He
Yeah.
started the first game in Atlanta.
Right. Well, because they didn't have anybody, basically. Before we get to some pitching talk.
Let's talk about Prize Picks, which is a fun fantasy baseball or fantasy sports thing. You think you know something about what's going to be happening. There's lots to follow right now in sports.
Yes.
For the Twins. You've got basketball. You've
I
got
gave
hockey.
Prize Picks a try a little bit ago for NBA and enjoyed it. You're picking more or fewer on a lot of things, and you compare together. You think, I think this guy's going to score more points than the line they've set.
Right.
But I think this guy's going to score fewer.
And you're winning real money by doing this.
You pair them together, and you can get kind of big payoffs with that based on your picks.
And because it's like right now the playoffs, they've got a bunch of special stuff for like the NBA. Which you can win like 2,000 times what you end up paying for to try out these lineups. Right?
Late in the NBA regular season where I did like 6 picks paired together, and the payoff was like 300 and something to 1.
Yes.
And I was like 2 points away from just retiring, basically. So it does add a dimension to watching some late night NBA games, basically.
They also have stuff like special things on some special days, like today, Friday, when we're recording this, is Flex Friday. So you can opt in and tap a checkbox in your lineup builder, and then you're eligible for like protected play and a bunch of other stuff. Lots of variations on how you get to play.
Yes. So. And if you download the app today and use the code Gleeman, that's the Prize Picks app, you can get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's the code Gleeman to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. That's our last sponsor.
Storyworth. Mother's Day is coming up. I will tell you, I gave my mom Storyworth as a gift 8 years ago. One of the best things I've ever done. Even at that time, I knew she was not going to be around forever. She was recovering from a stroke, etc. And what ended up happening was she ended up outliving my dad. And because I had done that, so I should explain what it is, first of all. Basically, you used to go to Storyworth, sign up, and what they do is they send an email to that person that you're giving the gift to.
A weekly prompt.
Right.
Where they ask a question, or they say, tell me a time you did this, or tell me your first job. It's kind of massaging stories and memories out of people who maybe haven't even thought about this stuff for years, let alone told their family about it. The beauty of it is, it's a different prompt, and they have different ways of getting the information.
And not only do you get that prompt back,
but at the end of the year, you can turn it into a physical book if you want. And then it becomes almost like an autobiography. Yeah. It's like the story of this person or the story of the family.
It's not only something then you have then later on when they're gone, but even when they're still around, you're like, oh, Mom, I didn't know that you had this car when you were a kid. Or
it
something
truly
like that.
is like a weekly icebreaker to get people talking about memories and stories and stuff.
That's right.
And it's a perfect gift for people like me who are bad about remembering things.
Yes.
Because there's no physical element initially. And
true,
so you can get it a day before you need to give it, and they'll just get signed up, and the email will go to them.
Exactly.
And then at the end of the year, you can have a second gift. Basically.
And Mother's Day's coming up in a couple of weeks, so keep this in mind. To give all the moms in your life a unique, heartfelt gift you'll all cherish for years, Storyworth. Right now, you can save $10 on your first purchase when you go to storyworth.com/Gleeman. That's storyworth.com/Gleeman. Save $10 on your first purchase.
Okay. Let's talk a little pitching, because I feel like we've been very hitting heavy, which the Twins have not been very hitting heavy. They've been very hitting light, so we took an opposite approach, I suppose.
Fair.
Few things here on the pitching front. Let's start with the rotation, I guess. So Festa made his third and final start Wednesday. Wasn't his sharpest. Wasn't a horrible start or anything.
4 innings or 5?
4, 2 runs, I think. Wasn't great. I mean, the lineup is weak. But
0 runs through 4, and then he put the first 2 guys on.
Which has been a little bit of a pattern. He actually he was very he's very hard on himself. He's a very smart guy, Festa. He's definitely not like typical, jock demeanor. And I think he's also somewhat of a late bloomer in that when they drafted him, out of Seton Hall, which isn't a baseball powerhouse. He was like a mid-round pick. He was throwing 92. Now he throws 96. He's an example of a guy who spent the first 22 years of his life as a really good baseball player, but not like destined for superstardom.
Right.
And I think that kind of molds your mindset and like how you are. And then when you late bloom like this,
sure,
I think you have a different reaction to things where it's like he's very intellectual about his approach to things, and he's also very hard on himself.
Sure.
And Baldelli actually has said several times, including during spring training, I think he talked to you guys, he really has found Festa to be very enjoyable to talk to, even in bad situations. Like, hey, come into my office, we're going to send you down, which they just had that conversation Wednesday,
right?
Because they knew Pablo Lopez is coming off the IL, which ends up being tonight, Friday. It could have been Thursday, but they let Paddock start. We'll talk about that in a second. And Festa knew the score. Festa's smart enough. He can see the schedule and all that stuff.
Have they made that roster move yet?
They sent Festa down.
Okay.
It'll be pregame Lopez. They didn't want to pay Festa an extra day of service time, so they sent him down. They played with 25 guys yesterday. Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah. I'm sure they have some other excuse for why that was.
That
but
can't be true.
Of course it's true. Why not just have a reliever for a day or Festa sit for a day, make an extra $5,000 and get a day of service time? They've done that before, where they do the move the night before and then they don't.
So it was an official transaction on
Correct.
Wednesday.
They played. They had 25.
I missed that.
They had 25 people on a 26-man roster yesterday.
Yeah, and one of them was hurt.
And one of them was Well, no, they had made that move too.
They had made that move
it was
in the
Gasper,
morning. Right? Yeah. That's
whatever. But so Baldelli has talked a few times, including Wednesday, where he basically said, "We're sending you down. You pitched fine. You did a good job." I mean, he was supposed to make one start, ended up making 3 starts. They were just good. I mean, they weren't overpowering 7 shutout innings, but for a guy still getting his feet wet in the majors, jumping into a rotation spot like that, he's got a 1-something ERA, good strikeout to walk ratio. Couple moments where, second, third time through a lineup, he had some issues, and he's talked about that's the next step for him is figuring that out. But Baldelli is so full of praise for him, not just with his pitching, but like the mindset he brings. And like he says, he comes into my office and he's bringing up stuff he's got to work on. And he's bringing up, I know the plan is this and that. And Baldelli really seems to have like taken a shine to him, like almost maybe like kind of kindred mindsets a little bit, which is interesting. Not always the case with pitchers. And, manager who was a center fielder.
You are correct.
We could point to some opposite examples. We won't. But and so I think this was a good showing for Festa. Now he'll go back to AAA. There's some continued stuff he needs to work on. He's still, I think, trying to incorporate that 2-seamer, the sinker, into his mix a little bit. But the velocity looked good. Got swing and miss with the slider and the changeup like he always does. Threw strikes pretty well, other than late in yesterday's or Wednesday's game, which he was kicking himself for. Leadoff walk and all that. But I do think this sets him up now for, look, if they need another spot starter, it's going to be him or Matthews, probably depending on the schedule. But this sets him up now. Go pitch at AAA for a while. And then hopefully, in my mind at least, the next time we see you, there might not be a return to AAA.
Hopefully.
Like, if it's a month from now, if it's 2 months from now, whatever it is, go put together a good stretch at AAA. And now you can get the job done in the majors. We know you can get the job done in the majors. So that seemed like the mindset or the kind of send-off that they gave Festa. And everybody was full of praise for him. He's a real soft-spoken, like almost like a bookworm type of personality, which is kind of interesting for a guy who's 6'6" and throws 97 or whatever. So Lopez is coming back tonight after making the 1 rehab start for the Saints. He was eligible to come back Thursday. They chose to have Paddock start Thursday, and I asked about that, and I was basically told, why don't we give Pablo an extra day? Like give him 6 days before he starts. Now, I thought maybe it was the matchup where the White Sox are certainly a weaker lineup than the Angels, but the flaw in that is Paddock got hammered by the White Sox in his first start of the season.
That's true,
Now, maybe it's a chance for him to, face them a second time. He didn't look great yesterday, although I don't know how much to read into that.
The weather had anything to do with it?
Yeah, he was asked about. He was given an opportunity to use that as an excuse. Let's put it that way, and he avoided using that as an excuse.
Actually, my question was, do you think the weather had anything to do with Paddock starting instead of Lopez?
Oh, that could have been, although it wasn't supposed to be like that weather-wise.
All day long it was like maybe, or all week long it was like maybe it's raining Thursday afternoon, maybe it's not.
They didn't think it was going to be like that. But yeah, that could have played a factor too. Paddock he was kicking himself afterward too. He actually said like this was the worst like I've ever felt like mechanically. And so the fact that I only gave up 2 runs and went 5 innings in bad weather.
Yeah, that
he was
4th inning, 5th inning where he made a meal of it, walked in a run.
Yes. Yeah, I mean,
Goodness.
he will consistently talk about himself as an extreme strike thrower, and that's borne out in results over the years. I mean, he's walked fewer than 2 guys per 9 innings, which is a phenomenal, Brad Radke-esque. But we haven't really seen that this year. We've seen too many walks from him. He had 4 yesterday, including what you're talking about where he walked in a run, which is super uncharacteristic for him.
Yeah.
And to me, that suggests a couple things. One, because the velocity and the stuff seems to be there.
Yeah.
And he's maintained it actually better than he did last year, like start to start or even in starts, like peak velocity.
Which is to be expected the year after spring of Tommy John.
Yeah.
Right.
But he seems to be having some issues mechanically. He talked about that yesterday. Just kind of out of whack. The ball's just not coming out of his hand where he wants it. But beyond that, my theory is, and if you look at like his kind of progression of the effectiveness of his pitches, he used to be with the Padres basically a 2-pitch pitcher.
Right.
He had a pretty good fastball and an amazing changeup.
Yeah.
Then he blows out his arm. He comes back. He adds first he adds like a slider. Then he adds a slower curveball. He's always been trying to find a third pitch. But now you look, the changeup is no longer even a good pitch, really.
Right, yeah.
And he's not leaning on it nearly as much. But the fastball has really kind of exploded.
Yeah.
In part because he's just thrown it harder, but it's also changed some of the characteristics with the Twins. And the fastball's really become his go-to pitch.
Yeah.
Which isn't a bad thing. But I feel like there's been a lot last year and this year where he gets ahead with the fastball, he gets to 2 strikes, and then in years past he'd just throw that amazing changeup and get a whiff, and he can't finish these at bats. Then he starts to nibble a little bit, or it gets a little deeper, where one bad pitch can be a walk, and that's what I think we start to see. There's a little less confidence, it seems like, and it's justified in the numbers, with like the non-fastball, which is so opposite from what he was early in his career. Early in his career, the question was, can this guy find good enough other pitches to basically be a changeup artist?
Right, that's right, yeah.
And now it's like, can he find a second pitch to complement his fastball? It's been a very strange, and that happens when you have 2 Tommy John surgeries and things change. Like what you're throwing changes. But I still don't have a great deal of confidence in him having the upside. I'm not talking about 3 years from now because he's a free agent to be. I'm talking about
the issue.
The next 4 months, basically, 5 months. And he had the horrible first start. He's been certainly much, much more effective since then.
Yes.
And I give him credit for battling in bad conditions and all that yesterday. It wasn't a bad start by any means. 5 innings, 2 runs. Again, if they score some runs, people are giving him credit for battling and keeping him in the game and all that, but they were shut out, so it didn't matter. But he hasn't done enough I know people are calling for him to lose his spot basically anytime he gives up a run and all that. I get it. He's certainly done enough to continue starting for them.
For sure.
But he hasn't done enough to go, okay, we don't have to assess this on a week-by-week basis anymore. Sure. You know what I mean? Like he's still – and in part because Festas look good, Zebby Matthews is looking good at AAA.
That's the key issue, right, is that it's more about his contract status moving forward than it does anything else. You know, and the fact that, I think there is also a certain level of excitement and projection that goes on. What is the grass is always greener over in St. Paul. Right?
Sometimes it is, though. That's the thing. That's right. Sometimes new grass is. I'm not even going to talk about what I'm talking about. You ever start a sentence and you go, "Boy, I don't know how this was meant to end. Let's just cut it right here." That happens to me a lot. Let's see. There was one other. We broke down Joe Ryan's start. Against Atlanta, which went bad. Right. More on the Patreon
on Monday.
I really am at the point with him where it's like the upside is not in question. His ability in any given start against any lineup to go out there and throw 6 shutout and get 8 strikeouts with 1 walk and get 18 swings and misses. Like he's improved to the point where if he's healthy, he has as much upside as any pitcher they have.
Yeah.
However, what he's also proven year over year, and done it twice so far this year, is when something is out of whack with him, whether it's he gives up a couple of bloop hits, or a defender boots a ball behind him, or
a bad
as we
call
saw,
behind the plate.
a couple of bad calls in a row behind the plate. He just he spirals.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because off the field, he has a very California laid back sort of. I mean, he's a chill bro. Like, is what he is.
He looks like that. Yes.
That is what he is.
But he's also an intense guy.
Yeah, well, he's a tinkerer, and he's also a guy who's very into the data, and that's how he's become a good pitcher.
Right.
And so I think he feels. This is my sense of him. He feels like personally offended when the umpire isn't doing his job, and it affects him because in his mind, he's just been punished unnecessarily. Like, I'm doing everything right, and I'm not getting the payoff. And then it almost feels to me like if he gets screwed on a call or two, or the infielder boots a ball or whatever it is, or have you seen him get out of whack where he gives up a long fly ball that the wind pushes an extra 10 feet.
Yeah.
And in his mind afterward, he's obsessed with, well, that's not usually a homer.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, but it was a homer. Don't let that affect your next 10 pitches.
Right.
And it almost feels like in that Atlanta start, he got screwed in a couple of pitches that would have ended at bats or even, I think, an inning. Yeah. And it almost feels like he decides at that point, all right, I'll just groove these. I'll just throw strike, whatever. And I'm not saying that is
no,
his
that's not what he's doing.
But that's the effect. It's like, okay, then the pitch quality drops.
Okay.
He gets flustered easily, which is interesting because that's not how I would have perceived his personality. And that, to me, like we talked about, next step for Festa is like third time through the lineup. The next step for Joe Ryan is not to let things snowball, like not to let things compound on into itself, to like mentally reset from that. And I don't know how you fix that. I mean, that's just a personality thing or how you're built, basically.
Practice.
But, yeah, I mean, I guess
keep
practice getting screwed over and over again.
That's right.
So that's something to watch. And then also on the pitching, couple little bullpen notes. There was so much time and energy, including we discussed it on Patreon, about Jax.
Yes.
And, what will they do with him? And, will they give him 4 days off? Will they put him in a mop-up role? What'd they end up doing with him? They pitched him in a close game in the 7th inning instead of the 8th inning. That's literally all they did. No difference.
I did think it was interesting on that Tuesday game when they did that. And they did it again on Wednesday.
Then he came back and had another good.
They did on Wednesday, you're right. I was interested to see who took over the 8th and faced. So Jax came in that inning on Tuesday, and the 7th inning
2-1 game.
2-1 game, faced the 8, 9, 1, and 2.
Right.
Because he gave up a hit to one of them.
Yeah.
I think the 9 or walked somebody. I can't remember exactly.
It was a hit, I think.
Oh yeah, I think it was a double down the line or something probably. Anyway, he gave up a hit. Then what they had lined up then to take on the 3-4-5, also in a 1-run game in the 8th inning, was Varland.
Yeah, but that makes sense because they just basically flipped them.
Yeah,
it could have been Stewart.
But, it's just interesting how quickly Varland has moved he might be sort of the multi-inning guy towards the back of the bullpen for a while too. Yeah. It is not yet the end of April.
Yes, well,
and he is the setup man. And I was actually surprised he didn't come in the 9th on Wednesday, and I think he would have, except that they extended the lead on Wednesday to the point where Coulomb came in and closed it out at 6-3.
Yeah, I think Coulomb was the only guy warming up. I'm trying to think. Coulomb's funny.
He was the only guy warming up.
Because he's the only lefty, he's the one guy where you go, that's Coulomb. And he's also like 4 feet tall.
Right.
So when I look out to the bullpen, I'm like, Coulomb's the one that's easy to identify.
Right.
But I don't want to take a victory lap on a relief pitcher after 15 innings. That would be stupid. Believe me, even for me. However, we've been talking about this for 3 years with Louis Varland, right?
Yep.
And I'm someone who still thinks sort of, and certainly thought that he could be an effective starter. But there was no mystery to why there was so much talk about the bullpen with him. Because if you just unleash him for 15 pitches at a time and just say throw max effort, don't worry about your your lesser pitches, attack, which is his. We talk about Joe Ryan's mindset. Right. That's Louis' mindset. Attack. Like he's a guy who run through that wall. Yes, fine. Yes. Right. This is what everyone was envisioning from him as a reliever. It's gone well, obviously, but just come in and overpower people with your raw stuff. Pound the strike zone. Now his cutter and his I think it's knuckle curve classified technically, has played up because he's throwing it a couple miles an hour harder, but his command seems a little bit better, fewer middle mistakes. Now, again, small sample. I'm not taking a victory lap. But this is what everyone has been talking about for 2 years, maybe 3 years. Yeah. And Baldelli especially, by the way.
Exactly.
Baldelli fell in love with the idea of Varland as a reliever like on day 1.
2023.
Right.
Yeah, right.
This is why. Because you can come in and you can go max effort, 1 inning. He's 98 with the fastball, cutter at 92, knuckle curve that can drop out of the zone. Yeah. And some of these outings, by the way, are like 1, 2, 3 in like 90 seconds, and he just does that weird wrestler strut off the mound, and it's over.
Yep. He's leapfrogged Alcala. He's leapfrogged Sands. He's even leapfrogged Stewart, I think.
Yeah,
to the point where, and in fact, Jax at this point.
Yeah, well, and the Jax thing's funny because, and again, it's been 2 good outings after a handful of bad outings, so whatever. But we talked about how, because we got so many, we did a mailbag on Wednesday, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And a lot of questions were about Jax, like, what do you make of his struggles and what can they do and should we be worried and all that? And one of the things we talked about was, this isn't ruling out the idea that there is something up with him, physically, mechanically, whatever, mentally, who knows? Right. But when a guy has a 480 batting average on balls in play, meaning when a ball is put in play 48% of the time it's going for a hit, there is no room for any rational analysis unless you account for that. Because a bad batting average on balls in play for a pitcher is like 350.
Yeah.
480 is like you're not even in the world of baseball anymore. Like you're just being crapped on by God at that point. You know what I mean? Yes. Like, and so to try to break down how do his pitches look and how are his strikeout rate and walk rate and hard hit rate and all that, yeah, okay. But until you either wait for that to normalize a little bit more or just account for that, there's no room for rational analysis. And so that's why I wasn't necessarily as surprised. And we also know that Baldelli likes to put a reliever right back on the horse when they struggle. That is his approach to it. And Pete Mackey too, I'm sure that's where it's coming from. So yeah, what was his big, take a breather? Pitch the 7th inning of a 1-run game instead of the 8th inning of the run game. And then, by the way, right back out there next time. In
very next day.
A fairly typical spot.
Right.
And he looked good in both outings. Yep. The numbers are going to be ugly. I mean, for a while. That's the problem with relief pitching samples. You have a blow up. I remember John Smoltz, who's a Hall of Fame pitcher, late in his career had Tommy John surgery after winning 250 games as a starter for the Braves, and he moved to the bullpen.
He became the closer.
Yeah, he became a great closer, like a awesome closer. And it was either his first or second year as closer. People can go look, but he had like his 3rd outing ever. He gave up like 7 earned runs or something. And I remember him talking like at the All-Star break, where he said, like, people have been coming up to me all year and being like, it's rough as a reliever, huh? And he just kept screaming, like, I have like 90% of my runs.
9 of my 10 outings have been really good.
Like, I've been amazing as a reliever. You'll just won't see it for another 3 months because it's just got to. And I feel like even if Jax is good, which I do expect from him, because he does seem healthy, the stuff is there. He's still missing bats, all that stuff. He's allowed 10 runs in 10 innings or whatever. Like, it's going to take him 3 months of great pitching just to have a 3-something ERA, basically. And so don't let that, let's try to start with a slate maybe 2 outings ago and go from there, because any evaluation of his sort of season totals are going to get caught in the murkiness of the weird batting average on balls in play, the 3 bad outings. I'm not saying ignore that.
Poor throws to first base.
Yeah, I mean, just
he's hurt himself a little bit.
I'm not. Those hurt. Like when you evaluate the quality of his season, absolutely take that into account.
Of course.
But when you try to evaluate, has he turned things around? Don't get obsessed with that. But it's been huge to see him bounce back. But it's also, I thought, interesting that Baldelli and Pete Mackey, the pitching coach, essentially gave him no break. They essentially thought nothing's different about this guy. We're not worried about him at all. We're just going to say some good quotes about how we trust him, and we're going to have him pitch 1 inning earlier. Right. And it worked twice.
Yes, it did
but
work twice,
I mean, that's not what anyone would have suggested, certainly. But sometimes maybe that is the best approach. Is like, if you don't actually think anything's wrong with the guy, why act as if something's wrong with the guy? Now, if he would have gone out there in the 7th inning of a 2-1 game and blown that lead, That's dangerous to me because then you start to maybe get into a mental situation where it's like, and then
but it worked.
Yeah, so far, yeah.
Yep.
And then the last reliever thing you mentioned, Brock Stewart, he's back now, returned during the Atlanta series. We saw him
8th inning of game 2.
He also warmed up along with Duran so that if they would have scored another run in, what was the game Duran came in and
that was the game 1
loaded
of the White
the
Sox series,
bases.
Tuesday's game.
Yeah, was not pretty.
No. Yeah, he warmed up there, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not going to talk that much about Duran, but it is funny with Duran. Duran is a great example right now of people who look at ERA versus people who don't look at ERA for relievers. Because he's still, even after giving up a couple runs, he's got like a 190 ERA. Right. Yeah. And if you look at that, you go, oh, he's having his best season. He's been awesome. But the velocity continues to be down. Strikeouts are way down. Walks are way up. You know, he's just had a couple outings where it's just like, throw the ball over the plate, man. You got the best stuff ever. Like just
Tuesdays was
especially against the
dicey, man.
The effing White Sox. Like,
right.
So. But Stewart being back helps, as we talked about. You know, Louis Varland quickly rising up the trust rankings helps. Yeah. Hopefully, Brock Stewart adding to that helps. It would help if they could get Sands back to where he was last season. Yeah. He's been a little bit shaky, I think. It would also help if Alcala was like usable at this point. I mean, I honestly think we mentioned on the last Patreon that he reached a service time level where he can't be optioned.
Right. He could have been optioned down during spring training, but once he got to like 12 days in the majors or something, he could no longer be optioned.
Yesterday, for instance, was a good example of if that would have been last year, he probably would have been optioned after yesterday, which is he pitched like, 30-something pitches, 40 pitches or whatever.
He went 2 innings, the 6th and the 7th. Right.
They did that a lot last year. Well, he can no longer be optioned.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean they're stuck with him for the rest of their lives if they don't think that's a smart move. It just means you'd have to DFA him, risk putting him on waivers. He would almost surely be claimed off waivers, obviously. I think so. Because, I mean, whatever you want to say about Jorge Alcala, there is upside just in the raw ability. Right. But, I mean, I've never got a sense, and we've talked about this over the years with him, that even when things were going well for him, first half of last year, 2-3 years ago, the furthest he ever got was like secondary setup man in the kind of trust hierarchy. And that is somewhat confusing at times. Particularly, I thought last year they made a mistake by using him as like a multi-inning long reliever and then sending him down. They were treating him as like a bulk guy when he's really just a max effort 1-inning guy.
Right.
And maybe that hurt him. You know, he's had health issues and all that. But ultimately, the lack of faith in him, I think, has been kind of borne out. Like he's made it difficult.
Yeah, whether or not that has been a self-fulfilling prophecy,
right. That's a good way to,
or whether or not they were just right.
Right. Either way,
to be seen. Right?
That's where he's at right now. So he's, I mean, in a way,
he's the multi-inning guy right now. He was yesterday,
just by default, basically. Yeah. Let's finish with a couple other just random notes. Did you see post game yesterday? Which it's a hell of a scene post game after an hour or something rain delay.
I bet.
Because they hear.
I saw it on the TV. I did not actually hear what
they hear before we hear that the game's getting banged. Right. So like guys are home by the time we get down there. I'm going to find you the quote. So Correa was asked about his ongoing struggles. And the question that I think he was asked, I don't know, I think Matthew Leach from MLB might have, which, by the way, if people want to hear an interview with Matthew Leach, get to know the new beat writer.
Yeah.
We did a great hour-and-a-half Patreon with him, one of the best ones we've done. He was an awesome guest.
He was a really
Talked
good
about
guest.
all kinds of fun stuff like a week and a half ago with him.
Yeah, a lot of kind of history of internet writing.
Yeah, but also just his story. So if you want to know who's this guy covering the Twins now. But I think he was the one who said to Correa post-game yesterday, like basically...
how you feeling about your swing?
Like, how are you? No, he said like, how are you feeling, like wrist wise and stuff. And he says, or what are you dealing with, health wise, feet, wrist, whatever. And he said, here was the quote: "I'm dealing with my swing sucks right now. The only thing I'm dealing with, I don't feel too far off. It's not like I'm going out and striking out 3 times a night. There's been some good contacts, some good ABs. It's just the consistency is not quite there, and that's what we're trying to find." I appreciate the honesty. We've talked about this since spring training. Yeah, he just has not looked right to me at any point. Even good moments, he's had a few Atlanta series. He had a homer and a couple of good moments. But
that homer was like an opposite field.
Right. He just has not hit the ball with authority, especially to the pull side and especially in the air. And he's still fighting within the at bat, like fouling pitches off, taking borderline pitches. You get called out on a non-strike that
was
hurt them.
Infuriating.
What, couple guys on?
Yeah.
But when he does hit the ball hard, it's tended to be on the ground, which has led to so many double plays. And then even in this White Sox series, he lined the ball basically to second base and got doubled
105 miles per hour
with two guys on, and it was a double play that way.
Bases loaded.
Bases loaded, yeah. And so there is an element of bad luck. However, the swing quality is just not what Carlos Correa has been.
Right.
And I also think the struggles for a while, he was still putting up good exit velocities, driving the ball at least to the opposite field, and he was clearly unlucky. Like at 3 weeks into the season, he had like a 140 batting average, and his expected batting average was like 260. Not a lot of power, but you could at least go, well, obviously he's been unlucky. Now he's got like a 190 batting average, and his expected batting average is like 220.
Yeah.
And his expected slugging percentage, which is what I'm really more worried about for a guy who's, like he said, he's not striking out that much.
Right.
His expected slugging percentage is like 330. Like he's just
hitting
not
the ball into the ground.
Right. And there's no extra bases on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if that's a health thing. I'm less worried, I guess, that it's related to his feet, which is because he's looked great defensively.
Yeah, great, but the wrist is worse than the feet.
Right. And so once we heard, he left the game on a foul ball last homestand with the tweaked wrist and revealed afterward, I've been dealing with this since the end of last season.
Right.
Well, I mean that.
But then he ended up having a pretty good series that very next series versus Atlanta.
But think about what we've seen: horrible spring training.
I agree.
He's hitting 190.
Yep.
Again, not striking out a lot, so it doesn't suggest there's a loss in like physical ability.
Before we knew about the wrist, my speculation was that he had tinkered with this, was trying to implement something new in his swing over the offseason, hadn't figured it out completely yet in spring training, and it was still messing him up a little bit. And then we found out about the wrist.
I think maybe what you're seeing, and I don't disagree, is just trying to compensate for that. Like
maybe
just not being able to rip the ball the same.
Maybe.
Because I don't get the sense, and this could be wrong, but like if you look at like his bat speed, and like I said, he looks great defensively. I'm not going to say he's running well, but I don't think he's running any worse than he has. I don't think it's a loss of like physical ability at 30 or whatever he is, that would be the real worry. But if he's been dealing with this wrist for 6 months now and it's not any better.
Right. If it didn't get better during the offseason, when's it getting better?
That's a worry because, I mean, he's their best player.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way. If they're going to be good, he's going to be their best player. Sure. And I suppose if they're not going to be good, he's going to perform like this. I mean, he's a quarter of their payroll, and he's their best player. He's certainly their leader on and off the field, and he just has not looked right, to me at least. And I think the numbers are more and more starting to back this up, basically since he reported to spring training.
Speaking of best player and help on the way, do you have any notes or any update? Or did they give any update on Wallner?
Not close to returning.
Okay.
Or not close to going on a rehab, let's put it that way.
Okay.
Still bruising and soreness with the hamstring.
Because that 10-day would, I think, as of today, would be that 10-day. Or today or tomorrow would be the 10-day.
He won't be back until May, obviously. Let's see. I had one other. I wrote about this morning.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to talk about this, too, because when I was talking about
we can end on
Rocco's playing his hits, this is yet one more sign. And I think how early he's pulling some pitchers. I think how he's managing the bullpen. You see Rocco, which you never saw during the regular season. Rocco is more and more leaning towards managing like this. They are in a pennant race or something.
Or he's saying, if I'm going to go down,
exactly.
I'm going to go down swinging how I want to go.
Damn straight.
Swinging.
I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying it's been interesting to watch that over these last 2 weeks.
Yeah,
how much he is not mixing and matching. He is staying with the same nine guys. And now, to your point, we've never seen him with these two guys.
Right. So what you're referring to, I wrote about this morning on The Athletic if people want the full quotes and everything.
It got to the point where I was wondering, is Vasquez hurt?
Well, we have to tell him what we're talking about first, John. Jesus. 3,000 episodes in, John's like a rookie. It's like, you're like a Bambi.
I get excited.
Legs going all over the place.
A little bit.
Yeah. So now this started in a weird way, I would argue, when Vasquez took the ball off the arm
of his hand.
Yeah, off his hand, and was clearly
Tuesday,
injured.
Monday Mets game, right?
Yeah. Last homestand.
Yeah.
And sat out, had to exit that game, and they were down 4-1, and they turned to Gasper to finish the game, not Jeffers, because Jeffers had injured his thumb like 3 days earlier and had the nail and everything was all screwed. It was all bloody that day.
Right.
I looked at it. It was gross. And by the way, that's coming from someone I showed him I said, hey, we're screwed up thumb brothers. Nice. I slammed this in a door 12 years ago. It still doesn't grow right. He was like, oh, that's great. Something to look forward to. But since then, basically, now Vasquez started yesterday, but it was a day game after a night game. Now, day game after a night game is a very typical place for the backup catcher on any team to start.
Right.
So don't read anything into that. Jeffers had just caught the previous 3 games, including the first 2 games of that series, including the night before, and 6 of the previous 7 starts had gone to Jeffers.
And the one that wasn't was a day game following a night game.
Right. And so Baldelli was asked about this. Because this is the sort of thing that has to be noticed and asked about, because it's not like Baldelli will just open his media session one day and say, Jeffers is now getting a bigger workload.
Right.
Like if this isn't asked, they will never announce this. Like they will never say this. So, but it was.
I was assuming Vasquez was still having trouble recovering.
Well, that was
that Monday.
part of it, but I think he's fully healthy.
Of course.
He looks healthy. But
he had a pretty good day yesterday. Actually.
That's right. Well,
2 doubles.
So my ability to pre-write something, we've talked about this over the years.
I noticed when you published that. Yeah.
So I pre-wrote this, and then I was like, well, I just have to update Vasquez's numbers afterward.
Right. Yeah, they look great now.
Well, they still don't look that good. He's hitting 150, but he had 2 doubles, 2 for 3 with 2 doubles or something like that. So I just had to update the numbers. But for 2 years now. So in 2022, Jeffers broke his thumb or his hand, missed like 2 months, but also hit like 190 and just struggled. Yeah. And their reaction to that was, we can no longer just assume Jeffers is going to be the primary catcher because the performance hasn't been as consistent and he's been injured. So they went out that offseason in December of 2022,
early in the offseason,
going into 2023, and signed Christian Vasquez, who at that point was 31, I think, and had just come off a World Series with the Houston Astros after a long decade stretch, including a different World Series with the Boston Red Sox. Right. He was one of the better reputationally, defensive catcher, leadership, durable, not a great hitter, but a decent hitter with the Red Sox. They signed him to a 3-year, $30 million deal. And I can tell you now that they were competing with a handful of other teams who essentially all offered him 2 years, $20 million.
Right.
And the Twins, in order to get him, because they felt catcher was a real priority, they just basically offered him a 3rd guaranteed year at $10 million. Now, that's a big risk in all circumstances for a 30-something-year-old catcher, because when they age real fast, and particularly for a guy like Vasquez who had a lot of mileage on him, caught a lot of games for a lot of good teams and a lot of big spots. So he comes in 2023, and he was the main guy, although it was basically a timeshare where he was getting like 55 or 60% of the starts, and Jeffers was getting, little less than half of the starts. But he didn't really hit.
Right.
And Jeffers,
by midway through the year, it was 50-50.
It was basically 50-50. And the discussion that we would have then was, is there room for this to go more than 50-50 towards the Jeffers side?
Right.
And no. And then last year, they literally split it 81-81 in terms of starts at catcher. Jeffers got some additional time at DH because he was hitting much better. And Vasquez's offense got even worse.
Yes.
Now this
and it was almost every other day.
Yes, they almost, unless somebody was banged up.
Right.
They almost literally alternated games behind the plate for like 95% of the season.
And we should also mention, in both years, both of them stayed healthy.
Yes. They were the only team in baseball over the course of 2 years to only start 2 different catchers.
Right.
So poor Jair Camargo was up for like 5 days just to sit there, basically. I think he pinch hit and something, which is remarkable. And that's still the case, by the way, this year. Gasper hasn't started a game.
Right.
It's amazing because that position, I mean, man, the average team must use 4 catchers a year.
Of course.
But the problem now is Vasquez is coming off back-to-back years with a sub-600 OPS, which even at the catcher spot is well below average. And Jeffers, while he hasn't been consistent by any means, he did pop 21 homers last year, and combined over the last 2 years, he's like, I think, 4th or 5th among all catchers in OPS. Yeah. Got power. He's just a much, much better hitter than Vasquez. However, they split last year because reputationally, or some numbers, pitch framing, for instance, show Vasquez as a very good catcher and show Jeffers as a weak catcher. However, what I will note, and I've written this before, is in both 2023 and last season, 2024, Twins pitchers collectively had a better ERA throwing to Jeffers than they did Vasquez. Now, those numbers can get real.
That's that's a sabermetric stat that we don't usually trust.
Correct,
too much.
because it's dependent on, if Jeffers catches Ober and Ryan every time, and Vasquez catches all the rookies every time, well, of course Jeffers is going to. But because they've essentially just alternated,
it's about as good of a,
it's as clean as that stat's going to get. And I don't think it means that they should be throwing to Jeffers instead of Vasquez. I still think Vasquez is the better defender. But what I think it means is Jeffers' defense has not been a problem relative to Vasquez. And so now you turn to this year, and
what does this team need? Offense.
They've essentially been still alternating up until about a week ago. Jeffers had a few more starts, and then Jeffers will occasionally start at DH, and then Jeffers won't be removed for a pinch hitter, whereas sometimes Vasquez gets removed. So Jeffers has like 1.5 as many plate appearances, even though their starts were kind of equal. But prior to yesterday, Vasquez was 3 for 30, and it wasn't a good 3 for like it wasn't a lot of line outs or anything. Now he goes 2 for 3 yesterday. Now he's hitting 150. But they're so desperate for offense, and actually prior to Wednesday, when Jeffers went 3 for 5 with a double, Jeffers wasn't hitting all that well either. But he was hitting 200 points of OPS better than Vasquez, and then he had a good game Wednesday. And the thing with Jeffers that I will note is, he's been a very good hitter for a catcher. His expected numbers are the best on the team this year. And if you do think back, he's driven a lot of balls to the gap, like right and left center, that have been tracked down. And he had one that almost went for a homer.
He went off the top of the wall.
So you can kind of see how, he's only slugging 340, but his expected slugging is like 500. And so they look at those numbers, obviously. And so I think, like you said, why have they, after 2+ years of this, of Vasquez really not hitting but being the better defender, and Jeffers at least having great stretches offensively for a catcher, why now? Well, I think Vasquez looks worse than ever, which isn't surprising at 34. I mean, this is the decline phase of a catcher. That contract has not worked out well, obviously. But they just need offense.
That's it.
It's as simple as that. And
they are doing whatever they can to create offense at this point.
And so you toss in the good expected numbers for Jeffers and what seems to clearly be a decline phase, even from a low bar previously with Vasquez offensively. And I think that kind of tipped the scales for Baldelli. And, this isn't a decision that Baldelli would or even probably could make all on his own. I mean, this is a discussion with the front office. He wouldn't all of a sudden go, I'm starting this guy 6 out of 7 without them kind of signing off on that.
I agree, but I can see where he would be the person being like,
to push for it. And I think we've talked about this for a year and a half, basically. It's like the level of defensive advantage Vasquez would have to have over Jeffers to make up for what is a much more quantifiably easy to see offensive edge. I mean, in their time together, which is now 2+ seasons, Jeffers' OPS is 200 points higher than him. That's a lot of pitch framing and pitch blocking needed to make up for that. And Jeffers has thrown off a league high 4 guys on the bases this year. Their ERAs are basically even when catching. And so that is something that people have been waiting for 2+ years on. And the Twins have been pretty insistent on not changing their plan at catcher. And if laid out why, I mean, they clearly believe in rest is needed for catchers to not wear them out. They also clearly believe in Vasquez's defense and leadership and all that stuff. But I think he's less good than he used to be. Jeffers seems to be hitting the ball very hard, at least relative to the struggling lineup. And I do think it's as simple as like, we just need somebody who can hit.
Yeah.
And we know Vasquez can't hit at this point. And I'm not trying to crap on the guy. Like, he's been a real good player for a long time.
Yes.
But he just
hasn't been hitting. Like, I don't know. Yeah, right.
And Jeffers at least can pop a double or a homer. And so, but that is a big change. I mean, that is, in terms of like approach or like usage, this is one of the biggest changes that they've had. Like, it would be as if they stopped platooning or they stopped, whatever. And so now they just need Jeffers to actually hit.
That's exactly
for,
right.
A sustained.
I mean, that decision might have even been made 2 weeks ago, or a week ago, had Jeffers really been showing a lot of offense.
Yeah.
He hasn't been showing quite as much offense.
And then he got banged up for a while too.
Right.
I'll just read you, and we can end on this. But here was the quote, Baldelli about this. He said, "This was before Wednesday's game, so before Jeffers had 3 hits Wednesday." Baldelli said, RJ, that's Ryan Jeffers, RJ is going to find a few more bats in the near term and see if we can get the offense going more than we've seen. That's part of it. I think getting him a few more games and a few more at-bats might be able to jumpstart our group in some ways offensively. Yeah. I don't think that's unreasonable.
They are leaning into a lot of things to try and do what they can offensively. That includes the Keaschall stealing and the Buxton stealing. That includes starting a consistent 9 guys every time.
It also just includes calling up Keaschall,
rushing people back.
Lee.
Right.
We'll see how quickly Royce Lewis gets back too. That could be part of it. And I think I don't know that Vasquez has that many fans outside of his immediate family and stuff, but he's a respected. I mean, he's very well liked. He's got 2 World Series rings. I think, if anything, the fact that they sort of avoided the temptation of doing this for 2+ years, shows the level of respect, or maybe also sort of wishful thinking that he would get back to the point, because the year they signed him, or the 2022, which he started with the Red Sox and ended with Houston, he had like 275, 10 homers, 715 OPS or something like that. That's not amazing. That's an 8-hitter, 9-hitter, whatever. But that's like slightly, I think, above average production for a catcher offensively, plus good defense, good leadership. That's a starting catcher. That was the whole idea of signing him. But he's just at no point been that player for more than a few weeks. Yeah. And I also think when push came to shove in the playoffs 2 years ago, Jeffers started all 7 games. And he didn't play well, by the way. He really struggled in the playoffs.
You're right.
Vasquez didn't get off the bench. And you're talking about a guy who's lived in the playoffs in his career. So that was like the first sign where it's like, we're splitting time, but Jeffers is really the number 1 catcher. But this is now the first time we're actually seeing it kind of in action.
I mean, they certainly believe that is one of the reasons that both guys have stayed healthy for 2 years is because of the split time.
It's hard to argue with those results.
Right,
like,
exactly.
From a health standpoint, to keep 2 catchers.
I am sure that is part of the concern about having Jeffers play on an everyday basis and putting Vasquez in more of a backup role. They're going to be like, is Jeffers going to be able to hold up to this?
Yeah.
I know that Jeffers was anxious to get as many.
We talked to him about this at the Winter Meltdown.
Right? Yeah.
And he said all the right things, like he was saying, I deserve this or I deserve that.
He likes to play.
Yeah. And, I think his production, and you can, and we'll find out maybe, but you can certainly say, well, he over the last 2 years had the 4th best OPS among all catchers. Well, maybe that was partly because he was only playing 3 days a week.
That's right.
Getting some better matchups or just not wearing down. We're going to find out about that. But the flip side to that is, if you just tell me you have a top 5 or even top 10 guy in terms of offensive production at a position and they're only playing 80 games a year, well, the reaction I think most people would have to that is, well, let's see what happens if we play him 120 games a year. Now, I don't think they're going to go that far. I still think... I don't.
It'll be interesting.
6 out of 7. But I think
we'll get a better sense of it as we get further away from that hand injury. But
I think just in general. Well, first of all, there are very few teams that use catchers even like they did 10 or 15 years ago, like even during the Mauer era. And I know people criticized Mauer for not being durable, obviously. But if you go look back at Joe Mauer, he caught 100 games or even 95+ games a lot of years.
Yes.
Like when he was reasonably healthy, he had what would now today be at a very high workload for a catcher. It was just sort of an average workload for a catcher back then. I don't think the Twins ever envision a catcher, like it used to be 20 years ago where like your main catcher caught 120 games. I don't think they would ever do that with Jeffers. The question to me is like, is it
I mean, 2 out of 3 is 108 games, right?
Yeah, that seems to me like probably kind of the limit of what they would want to do.
I mean, you take a look at this next series. Jefferson probably starts tonight on a Friday night.
Yeah.
Saturday day game follows it. That's probably going to be Vasquez.
And then Jefferson starts the finale.
On Sunday. Then you come back on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday next week. Be interesting. They've got a stretch here of 10 games in a row. Yeah. 10 games in 10 days here. Be interesting to see how many of those. Yeah,
I mean, the Twins have had.
I think Thursdays is a day game.
The Twins have had a lot of good catchers over the years. Going back to Earl Batty, obviously, guys like Przinski, Brian Harper, and then, big one is Mauer. But we saw, like, with Mauer, the usage for a catcher is different than every other position because it's not usually matchup based. And it's really not matchup based when they're both right-handed hitters. Like you used to see it with Mauer when he was paired with Mike Redmond. Mauer was a left-handed hitter, Mike Redmond was right-handed. Sometimes with a lefty on the mound, although they didn't do this as much as I would have liked, Mauer took that day off. They kind of planned that day off. Put Redmond. Well, you can't do that with two righties. Instead, what you're going to see is day game after a night game, that's always going to be Vasquez.
Right.
3-game series, Jeffers' first game and third game is like a really easy way to manage that I think would end up. But also, and maybe I'll ask about this tonight. I didn't get a chance to ask about this yesterday. But will Vasquez be paired with specific pitchers, or will it truly just be schedule based? Because those are two very different approaches.
Yeah.
I mean, it used to be like in the 90s, like Greg Maddux was caught by the same. Eddie Perez would catch Greg Maddux, where Javi Lopez was the primary catcher. Well, that's how Eddie Perez would start 30-something games, basically. We've kind of gotten away from that. So I'm curious about that. Okay, let's shut up. We talked about a lot of stuff today.
Thank you to our sponsors, Prize Picks. Check them out. Storyworth and Game Time. And then a special thank you to our presenting sponsor, Black Stag Brewing. It's now being distributed to all of Greater Minnesota. So just stop by your favorite liquor store or the Black Stag Tap Room, and you can grab your favorite brew or try something new.
We will be back Monday morning on the Patreon, Patreon. We do 2 shows a week exclusively for Patreon. We would love to have you join us. We discuss stuff, as it happens. We react to games, all that stuff.
I should also mention Tuesday, we've got a Twins Daily Social Club outing at Mortimer's. I will be there if you want to watch some baseball with me. Watch the Twins take on Cleveland at, I think it's a 5 o'clock game, 5:10 start. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, pretty early starts for the Cleveland bet. Just go to twinsdailysocialclub.com. You'll find a way to buy, or not. You don't even have to buy tickets. You just get a ticket and you
reserve your spot,
and you get a free beer as part of it. I'm almost sure.
So yeah, we'd love to see you on the Patreon side. Monday and Wednesday, we'll probably do episodes. Patreon, patreon.com/Gleeman. If not, we will probably talk to you next Friday.
Gleeman